everybody. No, I haven't taken to drinking on the job, and no, we're not celebrating anything, although some of you may wish to celebrate. We're talking today about bubbles, and specifically not this wonderful bottle of Piper Heidsieck champagne, probably pronounced Piper, I'm not sure, it's French. Specifically, we're talking about Australian travel bubbles, or Australia and New Zealand travel bubbles. I printed this off here from the immigration website, so what we're talking about today mostly can be found online. And the three main things we want to cover is, number one, what is this travel bubble? What is this Australian and New Zealand travel bubble? What does it mean? Who can use it? Number two, how do we use it? How can we take advantage of it? What can we do to take advantage of this bubble? Is there any benefit to migrants who are living in New Zealand or migrants who are living in Australia who may wish to come to New Zealand? And the third thing would be any cautions, anything we might want to be careful of with this travel bubble, because it's not all champagne and roses. There are some things we'll need to watch out for. So first of all, if you take a look on the immigration website, you'll see here quarantine-free travel. So from 19th of April 2021, quarantine-free travel will allow more movement between New Zealand and the safe zones in Australia. Now, it's not every state of Australia. I believe that Western Australia is still excluded, but they specifically mention here safe zones. The definition of safe zone may change over time, but for now, really this means, the main states, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania. They're trying to open up for tourism, I suppose, especially for New Zealanders to go to Australia and for Australians to come to New Zealand. But it's not only Australians. Now, these are the things that you must meet to be eligible for quarantine-free travel. Number one, you must meet immigration requirements. So what does that mean? Well, it means if you are Australian or holding an Australian passport or a permanent resident of Australia, then you can travel because you don't need to apply for a visa. But if you don't have that passport, or if you're not from a visa waiver country, then you're going to actually have to still apply for a visa. Now, Immigration New Zealand have declared that they're going to start processing applications again, which is great news. So from the 19th of April, if you're in Australia and you've applied for a visa already, some of our clients have more than a year ago and still waiting, or if you want to apply for a visa, they will process these. We don't know under what priority system, we don't know processing times just yet, but they will start processing these, and that's good news. Number two, you must have spent 14 days in either Australia or New Zealand. So this is really just to avoid people who are passing through. So if you've just arrived in Australia, you can't then just pass through to New Zealand. You have to have spent 14 days. You must have not had a positive COVID-19 test result, or if you have tested positive, you must have written advice from a health practitioner declaring that you're no longer infectious. This is quite interesting because some indications are out there saying that once you've had the virus, you may become infectious again in the future, but that's not for me to say. And you must not be awaiting the results of a COVID-19 test. Okay, so boiling this down, let's first of all talk about you're in Australia and you want to come to New Zealand. Okay, so we're assuming that you're somebody who requires a visa. You're going to apply for a visa. Now, a lot of our clients, or a lot of inquiries that we receive from people who are in Australia are professionals, right? These are people who very easily would be able to find work here, even under this difficult labour market. We're talking about maybe some high-level IT, marketing. Very often they're people who are coming from Europe, South America, and parts of Asia as well. Now, these people are not likely to have too many difficulties finding work in New Zealand. And so if they're coming from visa waiver countries, what we're telling them is, well, come for a holiday. Why not? If you're tired of Australia, if you've had trouble over there, if you're interested in looking into New Zealand, there's nothing wrong with coming here for a holiday. And the thing that I would just advise caution over with that is when you are at the border and you're getting on the plane, because of course if you're from a visa waiver country, you can just travel. When you're at the airport, if they pull you aside and ask you why you're coming to New Zealand, you need to be reasonably honest and clear about why you're coming. But just keep in mind that if you declare that you're coming to New Zealand to find work, and that's your only reason for coming, they may reject you and they may not allow you to come. So while we always advise you to be honest, we would always suggest that, we would also suggest that it's a good idea to have the intention of coming here for a holiday first. Spend some time, enjoy the scenery, go skiing, do all of those things. And while you're here in New Zealand, if you do happen to find work, if you do, come across a job offer that suits you and you want to apply, there's always that option to apply for a work visa. We'll come up to that a little bit more later when we talk about how to take advantage of the bubble. Going the other way around, if you're in New Zealand and you're thinking of going to Australia, now we're going to probably have a video coming up soon. I'm going to do another interview with our friend and associate over in Australia, Eddie, who's got his own migration business over there, and we'll talk about all the details of the Australian visa system and what's happening at the moment. But again, the same thing applies. If you're from a visa waiver country, you can actually just fly to Australia. You may need to apply for an ETA, the Electronic Travel Authority. This is going to be reasonably straightforward, and this is something you can do right away. If you're having to apply for a visa, either way, before you can come, let's say for example, you come from India or China. These are the countries where we see a lot of inquiries coming from. On the New Zealand side, what I would say is, okay, look, your visa application is going to have to be pretty well founded. Now, for example, number one, if you are a tourist, if you want to come here just to travel, just to have a look around, maybe to look for work as well, you probably want to make sure that your application is really, really well prepared, especially coming from country like India, Pakistan, some of the African nations, some of those countries which are actually technically deemed to be medium to high risk passports. And the reason is that it's very easy for them to decline your application. If you just go ahead and submit online, and if it's not well prepared and not well founded, it's very easy for them to refuse you. So with that, we'd always suggest to contact a professional and make sure that when you do apply, that you really put forward not only your reasons for traveling, but evidence. Right? Documentation and evidence. You're applying from offshore, which means they're not going to come back to you and ask you for more documents. They're not going to come to you and mention to you what concerns they have as to why they may not approve you before they decline. They'll just go ahead and straight away decline if they're not happy, and you may just waste your application fee. So that's the biggest warning I would say if you're thinking about applying for a tourist visa to come into New Zealand, or vice versa if you're in New Zealand and to go to Australia. Now, if you're applying for a work visa, you're going to have a job offer. And this is where things are going to get tricky, because New Zealand at the moment, I can speak about New Zealand specifically, and we'll get on to Australia when we do a video with Eddie, but here in New Zealand, the government right now is really heavily focused on training, upskilling and training New Zealanders, and making sure that New Zealanders are considered first for jobs. And even those applicants who are already in New Zealand, already holding employment and applying for visas, even they are coming across difficulty in applications for the visa. So if you're applying from offshore, it's going to be even harder. The immigration officers are going to seriously consider whether the New Zealand employer is actually genuinely trying to recruit from New Zealand first. So that's the thing I would caution very strongly. And I would say that in those cases, the best thing to do is not only yourself, but also have your employer speak with a professional here in New Zealand or in Australia if you're applying for Australia. Okay, so what's the best way to take advantage of this bubble? What's the best use of this bubble for you, the migrant who's either in New Zealand or in Australia, and wanting, and asking, well, what's this for me? Besides getting drunk off bubbles, is there something else I can do with a travel bubble? We've noticed a lot of discussion amongst migrants who are here in New Zealand and Australia about this idea of immigration laundry or cleaning up your affairs, so to speak. Whenever we talk about laundering, it has negative connotations to do with money. We're not talking about illegal tax or money laundering. We're not talking about anything illegal in terms of visas either, but this idea of the laundry or cleaning up your situation really refers to cases where you may have exhausted all of your options in one country, and you've come to a point where really the best thing for you to do is to leave and try another country, or to leave and then to come back with a clean slate, so to speak. Now, it's my understanding that New Zealand and Australia differ in this way. New Zealand is reasonably, how do we put it? maybe a little bit more strict than Australia about this sort of go and come back type mentality, whereas Australia has a little bit more of an open mind about it, and the Australian immigration policies appear to have more scenarios where, okay, you've reached the end of the road for now, but if you leave and then apply again from offshore, it starts again, or the process starts again, and you can be considered again. And we'll talk about this with Eddie in an upcoming video, because I do understand that Australia now has a specific type of visa or a section of the law whereby if you've been declined, you can't apply again, and people do actually physically need to leave the country before they're allowed to apply again. And this is where this bubble is really going to help some of those applicants, because if you're in Australia and you've been declined and you're not allowed to apply again, but if you're from a visa waiver country, you're fully allowed to and it's acceptable to just come to New Zealand, as long as you are coming here for a visit and for tourism, genuine purposes. And so you've come to New Zealand and then perhaps have a holiday, look around, meet some people, and then of course fly back to Australia again under the free travel arrangements. Then you've essentially cleaned up, you've laundered your affairs. Here in New Zealand, it's a little bit different. We find that often people who have reached the end of their road in New Zealand for whatever reason, and then they go back offshore, very often they do find it difficult to come back. Immigration officers will consider past applications, they consider the genuine reasons for coming back, and so we would advise caution about simply just leaving with the hope that you could come back. However, if you are from a visa waiver country, it's going to be a lot easier to take that holiday, come back. If you're in, for example, you might be in a job here that you're not quite satisfied with and you want to take 2 weeks off to go to Australia and see if you can try your luck, by all means, go ahead. And then when you come back, of course, you'll still have your job and your visa. Or you may find that this is a good opportunity to head off overseas for some, maybe take some study or gain some new qualifications. This is another thing that we're finding people are looking forward to with this open bubble. In other words, what I'm really trying to say is that if you're in Australia and you want to clean up by heading offshore and coming back, that's one thing. But if you're in New Zealand and you're thinking that you're going to be able to do a quick visa run, I would advise caution. This is something to watch out for. It's not really how it works here in New Zealand, and so you're better to talk to a professional first if you're having difficulty with your visa. It's not like some other countries where you can simply head offshore and come back and things are starting from scratch again. Okay, so there is one quite clear situation where people may want to use this travel offshore for a short time visa run type situation to their advantage. And this is in the situation where somebody is in New Zealand and holding a guardian visa. Now, many of you may be aware that if you hold a guardian visa, that you are not allowed to apply for an essential skills work visa or a student visa. And there are policy reasons for this. The reason is essentially that a guardian visa holder is holding the intention of looking after their child, usually their child while they're studying. And that child is usually an international student. And of course, if your child is an international student, they're paying international fees. And so immigration or the government has tried to avoid situations where people will come into New Zealand as an international, or with their child as an international student paying full fees, and then their parent is a guardian, and then within a few months they magically find a job offer somehow, and then once they take the visa for that job, then the child will become a domestic student. So New Zealand misses out on all of those international fees for the child, and immigration in New Zealand is very aware that people will try to find ways to do that. So they've specifically barred people from holding a guardian visa and then applying for an essential skills work visa or a student visa that could render their child eligible for domestic student status. Now, often in the past, pre-COVID, what people would do is they would then just, as the guardian, of course, if the child is old enough and doesn't require the guardian, they will just travel back home and forfeit their guardian visa. And then once they're back offshore, they'll then apply for the essential skills work visa or a further student visa because they forfeited the guardian visa. And in other words, they're applying from offshore, so they're allowed. Now, obviously during COVID, this has not been available, but now it is. So let's say you come from a country like South Korea, which there are a number of, it's quite common actually for South Korean children to come as international students with a guardian parent. Now, a South Korean can also travel to Australia on a visa waiver. So you might want to take a holiday. And while you're in Australia, you might want to forfeit that guardian visa and then apply for that next visa. So this is something that is a possibility. It's there, it's available. It's one of the cases where there's a specific visa run option for people. But as always, I would advise caution, and I'd advise to talk to an advisor or a lawyer or someone who knows what they're talking about at the very least. And because that's really the third main thing to talk about today is caution. What to be careful about with this visa. So with this quarantine-free travel. Now, besides the usual cautions, obviously about applying for any visa or about taking some action where you could find yourself in trouble with a visa application, specifically, if you're thinking about using the travel bubble to travel at all for any reason, the biggest caution is, and the government has clearly mentioned this on their website as well, they've said, look, if there's an alert level change, you may find yourself stuck. And if the alert level change is a simple reinstatement of the quarantine system, then the least would be that you'd be stuck having to quarantine for 2 weeks. You could also be stuck paying for that quarantine, and the cost is considerable. In the worst case scenario, if you found yourself in the middle of a breakout, you might actually find yourself effectively stuck. Now, back in April last year, we had a 4 weeks level 4 lockdown here, it was more than 4 weeks lockdown here in New Zealand. Now, if the same thing is implemented while you happen to be traveling in Australia or from Australia traveling to New Zealand, you might just be stuck, and you could end up paying the consequences of that, which could be losing a job, which could be financial loss, financial considerations. And so I would just say, look, be careful. And summing it all up, while we can get drunk on bubbles, and it's very fun to enjoy a glass, and maybe not during the daytime or the morning, but it's fun to enjoy a glass of bubbles. When it comes to travel bubbles, just like you might get a headache from drinking too much of this, there's all sorts of things to watch out for. So we'll wrap it up with that. Guys, feel free to get in touch if you have any questions about all of this. If you're thinking about applying for a visa to come to New Zealand, or if you're thinking about applying for a visa to travel to Australia, we do have licensed advisors for New Zealand and Australia in our team, so we can handle all of those inquiries. And have a good day.